Hi viewers, you are listening The Alpha King's Untold Stories, romantic audiobooks that will make your heart race and you will enjoy it a lot. Don't forget to subscribe for more enchanting love tales. Chapter 1. The Silent She-Wolf. The first snow of the year began to fall just before the deepest hour of the night. It dusted the towering pines of the Silvercrest territory in a ghostly white, silencing the world. Yet within the fortified walls of the Alpha King's lodge, Elias Blackwood felt no peace. Restlessness was a beast clawing at his insides. He stood at his chamber window, a silhouette against the firelight, his golden gaze scanning the sleeping village below. Tomorrow would bring the New Year's dawn ceremony, a time of renewal and pack unity, but tonight the air tasted of secrets. His wolf, Fenrir, stirred uneasily in his mind. Something is wrong, something is bleeding in the dark. It wasn't a physical scent of blood, not yet. It was a feeling, a slow, cold drip of sorrow that seeped through the very stones of his stronghold. For weeks he had sensed it, a shadow moving quietly on the edges of his vision, a sigh lost in the wind. It clung to her, Maya, the silent she-wolf from the displaced Winterfang pack. She was a specter among his people, beautiful, yes, with hair the color of winter ash and eyes like a frozen lake, but it was a beauty that seemed carved from ice and pain. She spoke only when necessary, her voice a whisper that barely disturbed the air. She worked in the healing halls, her hands deft and gentle, yet she never met anyone's gaze for long. The pack whispered about her tragic past, the rogue attack that wiped out her family, leaving her the sole broken survivor. They pitied her, but Elias, he was beginning to suspect pity was not what she needed. A soft, choked cry, swiftly muffled, pierced the stillness. It came from the secluded courtyard garden below, a place often used for quiet reflection. Elias moved without sound, his body flowing with predatory grace. He descended the private stairs, his senses sharpening. The scent hit him first, not just grief, but a sharp, coppery tang that made Fenrir snarl in alarm. Blood. He pushed open the heavy door to the garden. The scene before him was bathed in the pale blue light of the snow and the distant moon. Maya knelt by the frozen rose bushes, her slender frame shaking violently. One hand was pressed tightly against her side, dark stains blossoming through the fabric of her gray dress. The other hand was clamped over her mouth, stifling her sobs. But it was not a fresh wound from a fall or a blade. No. As she shifted, Elias saw the edges of something else, something etched into her skin just below her ribs. A mark, an old and cruel rune that made his blood run cold. He knew that mark. It was the sigil of the Blood Moon Traders, a faction of wolves who had tried to overthrow the Council of Alphas a generation ago through dark rituals and purges. They were extinct, wiped out to the last wolf, or so the histories claimed. Maya's head snapped up, her wide, terrified eyes locking with his. In that instant, he saw not just fear, but a bone-deep horror, a shame so profound it seemed to swallow her whole. She scrambled back, trying to hide the mark, to cover the blood, her blood, which smelled strangely potent, laced with a power that was both familiar and utterly foreign. My king, Her voice broke, a shattered whisper lost in the snow. Elias took one step forward, his own heart hammering against his ribs. The simple story of a lone survivor shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. This was no mere victim. This mark, this secret she bled to hide, spoke of betrayal. It spoke of bloodlines that were supposed to be erased. The truth, cold and terrifying, began to dawn on him as the snow fell around them. The silent, broken she-wolf in his care carried a darkness that could ignite a war, and the new year was dawning in mere hours. Chapter 2. A Truth Written in Scar and Blood. The silence between them was a living thing, thick and cold as the falling snow. Maya's breath hitched, a ragged sound that scraped the stillness. She tried to curl in on herself, to make herself smaller, invisible, but the dark stain on her dress spread like a cruel flower, and the ancient mark on her skin seemed to pulse under Elias's disbelieving gaze. "Do not move." His command was low, not with anger but with a force that vibrated with the weight of his rank. It was alpha tone, woven with the power of his wolf, and it stilled her frantic retreat. He crossed the distance in 3 swift strides, his shadow falling over her. He did not reach for her, not yet. He simply knelt, his eyes never leaving the scar. Up close, it was worse. It was not a clean brand, but a savage carving, a ritual mutilation meant to last a lifetime. The lines of the blood moon sigil were raised and twisted, a testament to unimaginable pain. And the blood, it wept from the edges of the old scar tissue, a phenomenon that defied nature. Wolf healing should have sealed such a mark shut decades ago. "This cannot be," Elias breathed, his own voice barely a whisper. "This mark, it was purged. Every bearer was executed." A sob finally escaped Maya's lips, a sound of pure despair. "Please, you don't understand. They think I'm dead. They must think all dead." Her eyes, those frozen lakes, were melting into torrents of terror. "Who?" Elias pressed, his mind racing. The council, his own advisors, they had celebrated the eradication of the blood moon line. If they knew a descendant lived, their justice was swift and absolute. A pup would not be spared for the sins of its ancestors, not when those sins involved the poisoning of alpha bloodlines and black magic rituals. "The man who gave me this," Maya gasped, her hand trembling over the scar. "He was my grandfather, the last alpha of the blood moon. He did this the night our pack fell, the night your warriors came. He told me to hide me, to bind my true scent, to make me nothing, a ghost. And for 20 years I have run, I have been silent." Elias felt the world tilt. The Winterfang tragedy, it had been a cover, a massacre used to hide a single priceless survivor. She hadn't just lost her family, she had been forcibly separated from her true, monstrous lineage and implanted into a loyal pack as a sleeper, a ghost. But why? What was the endgame? As if reading the question in his stormy eyes, Maya whispered the final devastating truth. "The mark, it doesn't just hide me. It's a lock. And my blood, the pure blood moon royal blood, is the key. On the first new moon after the new year dawn, if the last heir is sacrificed on the sacred grounds of their old territory, a door opens. A door to powers the council banished forever. There are still believers, my king, followers in hiding. They wait, they search for me." The pieces crashed together with deafening finality. The quiet she-wolf wasn't just a secret, she was a living, breathing ritual component. A countdown had been ticking away in her very blood since the night she was marked, and they were now on the precipice. The new year would dawn, and then the moon would cycle. His protectiveness, a slow-burning ember since her arrival, ignited into a roaring blaze. But it was a blaze that threatened to consume everything. He could hear the voices of his council now. "The bloodline is cursed, Elias. Destroy it, root and stem. Mercy is a weakness that led to their rise the first time." They would demand her life, not as cruelty, but as what they saw as necessary surgery for the health of all wolfkind. He made his decision in that frozen garden, with her blood on the snow and her confession hanging between them. Slowly, carefully, he removed his own heavy cloak, the midnight wool lined with fur. He leaned forward and wrapped it around her shaking shoulders, his movements deliberate, shielding her from the cold, from the accusing night. "They will not have you," he said, his voice ironclad, leaving no room for doubt or argument. Her eyes searched his, looking for the trap, the betrayal. You would go against your own laws, your own counsel, for me?" The concept was so alien it barely computed. Elias stood, pulling her gently to her feet with him. She was light, fragile as a bird, yet she carried the weight of a coming storm. "I am not just a king who follows laws, Maya. I am an alpha who protects his pack. And you," he said, his golden eyes holding hers, "whether you believe it or not, whether the council would acknowledge it or not, you are under my protection. You have been since the day you arrived. That mark does not define your pack. I do." But even as he spoke the words, a cold dread settled in his gut. He had just chosen his side, and when the sun rose on the new year, he would have to stand before the most powerful alphas in the land and lie. He would have to conceal a truth that smelled of treason and ancient blood. The first hook of the trap had been set, not by an enemy, but by his own conscience, and he had willingly stepped into its jaws. The silent she-wolf's secret was now the Alpha King's burden, and dawn was coming. Chapter 3. The Weight of the Crown and the Whisper of Conspiracy. The walk back to the lodge was a journey through a ghostly, silent world. Snow continued to fall, erasing their footprints almost as soon as they were made, a fleeting metaphor for the secrecy they now had to maintain. Maya walked beside him, shrouded in his cloak, her steps silent as a shadow. She did not speak, but the tension in her slender frame was a scream in the quiet. Every rustle of the wind through the pines made her flinch. Every distant howl, a ritual call for the new dawn, sounded to her like a hunter's cry. Elias's mind was a war room, strategies and consequences clashing like swords. He took her not to the healing halls where questions would be asked, but to his own private wing, to a spare chamber connected to his by a discreet door. It was a room meant for honored guests, or, in darker times, for prisoners under house arrest. The irony was not lost on him. "You will stay here," he said, his voice softer now within the stone walls, but no less firm. He lit a lamp, the warm light fighting the deep shadows. "My personal guard, Kieran, is the only one with access besides me. He is loyal to me, not just to the crown. You can trust him with your life, because I do." Maya stood in the center of the room, still wrapped in his cloak, looking lost and terribly young. "You're imprisoning me." It wasn't a question, just a hollow statement of fact. "I'm protecting you," he corrected, though the line felt dangerously thin. "The mark, does it always bleed like this?" She shook her head, a slight trembling movement. "Only when the moon is in its dark phase, and it gets worse, closer to the date. It's as if the magic in the scar knows what is coming and grieves or warns." She hugged herself. "My grandfather's magic was a bitter, painful thing. His protection feels like a curse." Elias approached her slowly, giving her every chance to retreat. "I need to see it properly, to understand what we are facing." He needed to know if the magic was purely symbolic or if it was actively harming her, a slow poison counting down the days. After a long, fearful moment, she gave a barely perceptible nod. She let the cloak slip from her shoulders and turned slightly, lifting the torn fabric of her dress. In the steady lamplight, the sigil was even more horrifying. The blood was not fresh and red, but dark, almost black, seeping from the raised, angry tissue. And there was a faint, sickly glow to it, a phosphorescence that spoke of deep, old magic. Fenrir growled a warning. "Dark sorcery. It smells of graves and broken oaths." "It must be cleansed," Elias muttered, more to himself than to her. "It cannot be." Maya's whisper was sharp with panic. The magic that binds it is tied to my life force. To try and remove it, it could kill me, or worse, it could shatter the spell hiding my scent and lineage entirely. They would find me in an instant." She was right. He could sense the delicate, deadly balance. It was a shackle, but it was also her shield. He felt a surge of fury at the long-dead grandfather who had inflicted this, at the fanatics who still hunted her, and the impossible position he now found himself in. Just then, a firm, respectful knock sounded at the outer door of his main chamber. "My king?" It was Kieran. "The council elders have arrived early for the dawn conclave. They are insistent." Elias's jaw tightened. Of course, they could not even grant him the peace of the night. He looked at Maya, her face pale as the moon. "Not a word, not a sound. Kieran will bring you food and supplies. You are unwell from the winter chill. That is all anyone needs to know." He saw the doubt in her eyes, the ingrained instinct to run, to hide, but he also saw the resolve in his. She gave another small, shaky nod. Elias straightened, the mantle of the alphaking settling back onto his shoulders, heavier now than ever. He closed the door between their rooms softly, but the click of the lock felt like the sealing of a fate. In his study, 3 elders waited. Thorn, a grizzled wolf with eyes like flint, who had fought in the Blood Moon Wars. Ilara, shrewd and unyielding, who valued law above all, and Cedric, the youngest of them, but with the fervor of a true believer in the council's absolute authority. "Elias," Thorn began, dispensing with ceremony. His nose twitched. "You smell of the night, and of distress." Elias forced his heartbeat to steady, his scent to remain neutral, a skill honed over a century of leadership. "The weight of the new year is upon us, Thorn. It is a time for reflection. What brings you from the warmth of the fire?" Ilara's sharp eyes scanned the room, as if looking for cracks in the stone. "Rumors, Elias. Whispers on the wind. They speak of old blood stirring in the shadows, that the cleansing of the Blood Moon line may not have been as complete as we were led to believe." A cold finger traced Elias's spine. Whispers from whom? Ghosts and bored sentries? The Blood Moon line is ash. Cedric leaned forward, his youthful face earnest. "Our seer, the blind Alpha is old. She had a vision last night, a flame burning in a field of snow, a flame that was not consumed but wept blood. She says it is an omen for the new year, a sign that a hidden ember from an old fire still glows." Isolde's visions were notoriously cryptic, but they were never wrong. The description was terrifyingly accurate. A flame in snow, Maya surviving against all odds, weeping blood, the scar. Elias forced a dismissive chuckle, though it tasted like ash. Isolde also once saw a flock of silver birds predicting a great harvest, and we had a famine. Visions are open to interpretation. We will not chase phantoms and let it sour the dawn ceremony. The elders exchanged looks, dissatisfied but momentarily checked. "Very well," Thorn rumbled, rising, "but be vigilant, Elias. The past has long claws. Sometimes it does not like to stay buried." They filed out, leaving a chill in the room that had nothing to do with the winter night. Elias stood alone, the words echoing, a hidden ember from an old fire. He looked toward the locked door. She was not just an ember, she was a spark, and he had just promised to shield her from the very people who would stamp her out for the safety of all. The conspiracy was no longer out in the wilds. It was here, in his lodge, in his council's suspicions, and the first crucial lie had been told. The hook was set deeper, and the line was pulling taut. Dawn was not just coming, it was coming to illuminate a king standing on the precipice of treason. Chapter 4. A Council of Shadows and a Test of Loyalty. The great hall was a cavern of anticipation, thrumming with the energy of 100 powerful wolves. Torches flickered, casting dancing shadows on ancient stone walls adorned with tapestries of legendary battles and lineages. The air was thick with scents of pine, hearth smoke, and simmering aggression. Alphas and their betas from the allied packs had gathered for the New Year's Dawn Conclave, a tradition of unity and shared law. Today, Elias Blackwood sat upon the raised stone dais, the Alpha King, but the crown felt like a band of cold, tightening iron. From his throne, his gaze swept the assembly, but his every sense was tuned to the silent room above, to the she-wolf whose terrified heartbeat seemed to echo in his own chest. He had left Kieran, his most trusted guard, with strict orders and a warning. If anyone but me approaches that door, you have my authority to use lethal force, even against an elder. Below, Thorn was speaking, his voice a gravelly boom that demanded attention. And so vigilance must be our watchword. The new year brings not just renewal, but responsibility, the memory of those who sought to corrupt our very essence, to twist the sacred bond with dark magic, must never fade. His eyes, like chips of obsidian, scanned the crowd, landing pointedly on Elias. Complacency is the fertile soil where betrayal takes root. Ilara stood next, her voice cooler, sharper, a blade of ice. The laws that bind us were written in the blood of traitors. They are not flexible. They do not bend for pity or for pretty, sorrowful faces. A murmur of agreement rippled through the hall. Any resurgence of the blood moon heresy must be met with immediate, total eradication. No exceptions, no survivors. To waver is to betray every wolf who died to keep our lines pure. Elias kept his expression a mask of regal stoicism, but inside Fenrir was snarling, pacing the confines of his soul. Each word was a strike against Maya, a verbal execution. Then Cedric, fiery and idealistic, addressed him directly. Alpha King Elias, your territory borders the old cursed Browns. Your pack has absorbed many displaced wolves in recent years. Your vigilance is the first line of defense. Have your scouts sensed anything? Any strange magic? Any echoes? Every eye turned to him. This was the test, the first direct question. He could smell their collective suspicion, a sharp, acidic tang beneath the hall's warmer scents. Lying to a few elders in his study was one thing. Lying to the entire assembled leadership of Wolfkind under the solemn tradition of the conclave was an act of profound treachery. He chose his words with the care of a man walking on shards of glass. The borders are quiet, the old grounds are dead and frozen, as they have been for a generation. This was true, the land was silent. My scouts report nothing but the wind and the snow. This was also true, they had reported nothing. He did not mention the secret he harbored within his very walls. A lie of omission, but a lie nonetheless. And the displaced you've taken in, Thorn pressed, not letting go. You vet them thoroughly. The Blood Moon snakes were masters of deception, of hiding their true nature. Elias felt a drop of cold sweat trace a path down his spine. Every wolf under my protection is known to me. The words were a vow, and he meant them with a new, ferocious intensity. Their pasts are tragic, but transparent. The air in the hall seemed to grow heavier, pressing down on him. Just then, the massive oak doors of the hall creaked open. A figure stood silhouetted against the gray dawn light outside. She was ancient, leaning heavily on a staff of gnarled rowan wood, her eyes milky and sightless. A hush fell, profound and reverent. Alpha Isolde had arrived. She shuffled forward, the crowd parting for her as if for a ghost. She did not ascend the dais, but stopped in the center of the hall, her unseeing eyes seeming to stare directly into Elias. Her voice, when it came, was a dry rustle of leaves, yet it carried to every corner. I smelled the snow last night, and in the snow I smelled tears, and in the tears I smelled royalty. A frozen silence gripped the hall. Elias's blood turned to ice. Isolde tilted her head, as if listening to a voice only she could hear. A crown of sorrow sits within these walls, a crown not of gold, but of scar tissue. The hidden flame weeps, King. It weeps, and its blood calls to the old shadows. She took a step closer, her blank gaze piercing. You stand at a crossroads. One path is lit by the cold, clear light of law. It is a painful light, but it is clean. The other path, it is shrouded in the fog of mercy. Beware the fog, Elias. It hides deep ravines. Her words hung in the air, a cryptic, damning prophecy. She had not named Maya, had not accused him directly, but the message was unmistakable. She knew, or she sensed enough to be a dire threat. Thorne's expression was grim triumph. Ilara's was calculating sharpness. Cedric looked alarmed, fervent. Elias rose from his throne, his height and power commanding the space. The words of a seer are a guide, not a verdict, he said, his voice ringing with an authority he had to forcibly summon. The only crown in this lodge is the one I wear, and the only law that rules here is mine, in accordance with our ancient covenants. This conclave is for unity, not for chasing phantoms based on riddles. He was defying her, gently but firmly, a dangerous move. Isolde simply smiled, a thin, sorrowful curve of her lips. The fog is already in your eyes, young king. I pray you find your way before you lead us all into the ravine. With that, she turned and shuffled back out the way she came, leaving a wake of stunned silence and simmering doubt. The conclave continued, but the damage was done. The hook of suspicion was now barbed, buried deep in the flesh of his credibility. As the elders discussed patrols and boundaries, Elias sat back on his throne, his mind screaming. Isolde's warning echoed. A crown of sorrow, a crown of scar tissue. He had thought he was hiding a survivor, but Isolde framed it as him wearing her crown, sharing her burden, her curse. The seer hadn't just exposed a threat, she had redefined the battle. It was no longer just about protecting Maya from outsiders. It was about the conflict now growing within him, between the unyielding king and the protective alpha. And the entire conclave had just borne witness to its birth. The dawn had broken, and it illuminated not a new beginning, but a king standing alone on a narrowing ledge, with the abyss on one side, and the wolves he was sworn to lead on the other. Chapter 5. The Keeper's Oath and the Unseen Web. The conclave ended not with a unified roar, but with a low, distrustful murmur. The alphas dispersed to prepare for the public dawn ceremony, but the glances they cast toward Elias were no longer purely respectful. They were laced with scrutiny, with unasked questions that hung in the frosty air like breath. He had dismissed Isolde's vision, but you cannot unhear a prophecy. Elias retreated to the solitude of his private war room, a chamber lined with maps and histories, the air smelling of old parchment and iron. He needed to think, to plan, but the image of Maya's terrified eyes and Isolde's milky, knowing stare warred in his mind. He was pulling on a thread, and the entire tapestry of his reign threatened to unravel. A soft knock, a specific rhythm known only to one. Enter Kieran. His beta and oldest friend slipped inside, closing the door with a silent finality. Kieran was a mountain of a wolf, with a warrior's scars and a calm, watchful gaze. He had been with Elias since they were unruly pups. His loyalty was not to an ideal, but to the man. The she-wolf, Maya, Kieran began, his voice a low rumble. She has not spoken. She eats little. She sits by the window, watching the snow as if it will form into hunters. Her fear is a living thing in that room, Elias. It hurts to scent. Elias rubbed his temples, a rare show of fatigue. What do you see in her, Kieran, beyond the fear? Kieran was silent for a long moment, a man who weighed his words like gold. I see a wolf who has never known a true pack, only survival. Her silence isn't defiance, it's the silence of a creature that has learned any sound might bring death. But when I took her food, our hands brushed. Her wolf flared just for an instant, not in aggression, in recognition, a deep, lonely howl from a soul that has been lost for a long time. He met Elias's gaze. She is not a monster, my friend. She is a ghost trying to remember what it feels like to be solid. The assessment landed heavily in Elias's chest, confirming his own instincts. Isolde came to the conclave. She spoke of a hidden flame, a crown of scars. Kieran's expression hardened. Then the clock ticks louder. What is your command? I need information. Elias strode to a large map pinned to the wall. It showed the continent, the territories marked in different inks. He pointed to a region far to the north, a place marked with a faded, ominous symbol, a crimson crescent moon. The Blood Moon ancestral grounds. The lore says they were salted, their standing tones toppled, but lore is written by victors. I need to know what truly remains. Is the site truly inert? Are there pilgrims? Kieran's eyebrows shot up. Sending scouts there is a breach of the council's edict. That land is forbidden, cursed. If we are discovered, we will not use our scouts, Elias interrupted, his mind racing down a dangerous new path. There is a keeper of the old archives, a historian named Silas. He is unconventional. He cares more for truth than for council decrees. He owes me a debt from a long ago winter. He turned to Kieran with a grim resolve. Find him. Bring him to me through the underground tunnels. No one can know. While Kieran melted into the shadows to enact his order, Elias knew he had to face the other side of the web. The ceremony was approaching, and his absence would be noted. He had to play the part of the untroubled king. The dawn ceremony was held in the main square, a sea of fur and hopeful faces turned toward the eastern sky, where the first sliver of the sun would crest the mountains. Elias stood on the central platform, a figure of strength and stability, leading the traditional howl of renewal. The sound rose from 1,000 throats, a powerful, beautiful song of unity, but to Elias it felt like a dirge. He howled for a future he was actively jeopardizing, his eyes scanning the crowd not for joy, but for threats. He saw Thorn watching him like a hawk. He saw Ilara, her sharp gaze missing nothing, and he saw on the very edges of the gathering, partially hidden behind the broad shoulder of a baker, a face that should not have been there. A man gaunt and pale, with eyes the color of a stagnant pool. He was not of Silvercrest. His scent, carried on a tricky wind, was faint but distinct. Stone dust, yew berries, and something cold and metallic. A scholar's scent, or an alchemist's. The man was watching the lodge, not the ceremony, watching the upper windows. Maya's window. A cold certainty settled in Elias's gut. The hunters were not just out in the wilds, they were here, in his village, on his territory. Isolde's vision had been a warning, but the presence of this stranger was a declaration of war. The web was not something he was untangling, he was standing in the very center of it, and the threads were beginning to vibrate with the movement of predators. As the sun finally broke over the peaks, bathing the crowd in golden light, a cheer erupted. The new year had dawned, but for Elias, the light only served to illuminate the gaunt man slipping away into a narrow alley, disappearing like a bad dream. The ceremony ended. His duties demanded he mingle, accept blessings, project calm. Every moment away from the lodge was agony. Finally, he extracted himself, his alpha authority a firm barrier against further conversation. He returned to his wing not through the main halls, but via a servant's passage, his senses on a knife's edge. As he approached the door to Maya's room, he heard it. Not a sob, not a whimper. A voice. Her voice, low, rhythmic, almost singing, a lullaby in a language that was old, guttural, and thick with sorrow. The blood moon tongue, a language banned, erased. He pushed the door open slowly. Maya stood by the window, her back to him, her fingers tracing the cold glass. She was singing to the falling snow, the ancient words, a soft, heartbreaking melody of loss for a home she never knew, for a family that was a lie, for a self that was a secret. She stopped abruptly, sensing him, her shoulders tensing. "Do not stop," Elias said quietly, his voice strangely thick. "It is a part of you. To deny it is to let them win." She turned, her eyes wide with shock that he hadn't condemned her. "It's a language of traitors, of dark magic." "It is your language," he corrected gently. "And right now, in this room, the only law is that you are safe, even from your own past." For the first time, a flicker of something other than abject terror crossed her face, a fragile, bewildered gratitude. It was a hook of a different kind, not of suspense, but of connection, thin as a spider silk, yet holding the weight of a fate. He had seen the enemy outside. Now he faced the more complex battle within, winning the trust of the ghost in his care, before the shadows at his door solidified into a force that could shatter his kingdom and her last hope forever. Chapter 6: The Archivist and the Echoes of Stone. The historian Silas was a creature of dust and whispers, brought to Elias's war room through the forgotten veins of the lodge, the old, cramped tunnels used by servants in ancient times. He smelled of yellowed parchment, dried herbs, and the peculiar dry scent of ink that had aged for centuries. His eyes, magnified by thick spectacles, darted around the room with a nervous, bird-like curiosity, finally settling on Elias with an unsettling intensity. "You ask for truths that are buried under official lies, Alpha King," Silas murmured, his voice like the rustle of pages. "The blood moon purge, the council's records are neat, a surgical removal of a cancer, but history is rarely so tidy." Elias stood before the map of the northern wastes, the ancestral grounds, the standing stones. "Tell me what the neat records omit." Silas shuffled closer, a bony finger tracing the faded crimson crescent on the map. They were not just stones, they were conduits, anchors for a different kind of magic, one that drew not from the moon's gentle pull on our wolves, but from the spaces between stars, a colder, older power. The purge, yes, they toppled the stones, but conduits, once opened, leave an echo. He peered up at Elias. "Think of a bell that has been struck. Silence it and the sound is gone, but the metal still remembers the vibration." "And the ritual?" Elias asked, the words tasting foul. Silas paled, his Adam's apple bobbing. "The crimson unlocking, a vile thing. The heir's blood, spilt on the central altar, which was not stone but a slab of meteoritic iron, would act as a key. It would resonate with the echo in the toppled conduits, amplifying it 1,000-fold. It wouldn't just open a door to that old power, it would fling it wide open. What would emerge or be summoned, the texts are deliberately obscure, but the consistent phrase is the devourer of lines. It speaks of a force that doesn't just kill, but unravels wolf-blood itself, severs the pack bonds, turns our greatest strength into screaming chaos. A profound, icy dread settled in the room. This was worse than he imagined. It wasn't about gaining power, it was about unleashing annihilation. Maya wasn't just a key, she was a catalyst for extinction. "Can the echo be silenced permanently?" Elias's voice was hoarse. Silas shook his head, a slow, mournful movement. "Not by any means, I know. The magic is woven into the land itself now, a scar upon the world. The only thing containing it is the fact that the key is missing. But He hesitated, his eyes glinting behind his glasses. But what? The records speak of a countermeasure, not a silencing, a redirecting, a sacrificial act of equal power, but of opposite intent. Instead of an heir's blood used to unlock chaos, a royal alpha's voluntary sacrifice of his authority, his symbolic bond to his pack, performed on the same spot, could theoretically retune the echo, bind it to protection rather than devouring. Silas looked away, frightened by his own words. "You must understand," he whispered, leaning in conspiratorially. "The Blood Moon followers who remain, they are not an army, they are a cult. Zealots who believe the Devourer's coming is a righteous cleansing, a return to a purer, more savage world. They are experts in hiding, in patience. They could have agents everywhere, even here." His gaze drifted meaningfully towards the door. "The she-wolf you hide, her scar, it is a beacon to them, yes, but also a lock. There is a reason it bleeds. It is a sympathetic link. The closer she is to the grounds, the more it resonates, the more it hurts. They could be using that link to track her emotional state, her fear. Her pain is a song they can follow." Elias recoiled. The scar wasn't just a mark, it was a homing device tied to her suffering. Every moment of her terror was potentially leading them right to his door. Just then, a frantic, coded scratch came at the war room door, Kieran's signal for extreme danger. Elias dismissed Silas with a sharp gesture, the historian melting back into the tunnel shadows like a phantom. Elias opened the door to find Kieran, his face grim. "The gaunt man from the ceremony, he's been identified. His name is Vesper. He presented himself to the gate guards as a traveling scholar of botany, seeking winter moss specimens. He has legitimate papers from the Southern Archives." "A perfect cover," Elias growled. "That's not all," Kieran's voice dropped. "One of the kitchen boys, a sharp-eyed lad, saw him this morning not in the forests, but leaving the old well in the abandoned courtyard, the one that hasn't held water in 50 years. Elias's blood ran cold. The old well was not a well. It was a relic, a stone circle that predated the lodge itself, a forgotten minor conduit, a place where old echoes might be faintly heard. "He wasn't gathering moss," Elias said, the pieces snapping together with terrifying clarity. "He was taking a reading. Like a dowser searching for water, he was searching for the resonance of her scar." He looked at Kieran, the full horror dawning. "They're not just searching the territory, they've pinpointed the source. They know she's here, within these walls." The hunt was no longer a vague threat in the wilderness. It had a name, Vesper. It had a method, and it was now sniffing at the very foundation of his kingdom. The web had tightened, and the spider was in his house. The chapter closed not on a question, but on a chilling certainty. The next move would not be one of search, but of siege, and Elias had to decide, faster than ever, if he was the king who would defend his law, or the alpha who would break it to save the flame flickering in the room above. Chapter 7. The Ghost in the Well and the Fractured Shield. Vesper's presence was a poison seeping into the foundation of Silvercrest. Elias could not simply arrest him. The scholar had cleverly embedded himself within the bounds of guest right, his papers impeccable, his story banal. An accusation without irrefutable proof would only fuel the council's suspicions and paint Elias as a tyrant fearing knowledge. So he wove a counterweb of silent observation. Kieran, a shadow among shadows, took personal charge of the watch. He assigned the two most discreet members of the royal guard, twins named Leora and Riven, whose bond allowed for silent communication, to tail Vesper's every move. They reported that the gaunt man spent his days sketching winter flora with meticulous, almost obsessive detail, but his evenings were spent in quiet conversation near the hearth in the common hall. He spoke with the elders, with guards, with healers. He asked gentle, clever questions about local history, about old tales, about unusual geological formations. He was mapping more than the land. He was mapping the pack's mind, searching for cracks, for sympathizers, for anyone who might have glimpsed a flame in the snow. Meanwhile, the pressure within the lodge mounted. Maya's scar, as if feeding of the proximity of its hunter, grew more volatile. Kieran reported that the dark weeping increased, the faint glow more persistent. She was in constant, low-grade pain, a pain she bore with a silence that was more devastating than any scream. Elias visited her each night under the guise of checking on his ailing guest. Their conversations were fragments, delicate as the ice on the windowpane. One such evening, she was particularly pale, her fingers clenched around a mug of herbal tea that did nothing for the chill within. "He is here, isn't he?" she asked, not looking at him. "Yes, a man called Vesper. He is taking readings." A bitter, hollow smile touched her lips. "The scar, it feels like a string being plucked, a wrong note that shivers through my bones." She finally met his eyes, her gaze dull with exhaustion. "You cannot win this, Alpha King. Every moment I breathe here, I endanger you. Their belief is a fanatic's fire. You are a king of stone and law. Stone cracks under enough heat. Law can be rewritten by the victorious." Her resignation was a new kind of hook, one that snagged not on suspense but on a profound sorrow. She was preparing him for her own surrender. "I am not just stone," Elias said low, his voice rough, "and my first law is protection. We are working on a solution." "A solution?" A spark of desperate hope flickered in her frozen eyes. "How? There is no solution to a blood curse, only fulfillment or death." "There may be another way," Elias offered, thinking of Silas's terrifying theory of a royal sacrifice. He couldn't voice it. The idea was too monstrous, too fraught. A way to break the link without breaking you. Before she could press him, a different kind of tension snapped into the room. It was Fenrir rising to a full alert in his mind, hackles raised. A scent carried on a sudden mischievous draft through the chimney. Stone dust, yewberry, and that cold metallic tang. Vesper's scent. It was faint, but it was inside the wing. Elias was on his feet in an instant, a silent snarl on his face. He raised a finger to his lips, his eyes commanding Maya to utter stillness. He moved to the door connecting their rooms, opening it a hair's breadth. The corridor was empty, but the scent was stronger here, a recent trace. It led not toward the main hall, but toward the back, the servants' stairwell, the same network of passages used to bring Silas. "He's found the tunnels." Elias moved like quicksilver, his scent masked by fury. He took the stairs down two at a time, his senses screaming. The lower passage was dark, smelling of damp earth and old mortar, and there, at the intersection that led toward the abandoned courtyard and the old well, a figure was crouched. Vesper. He wasn't sketching now. He held a strange device, a copper bowl filled with a dark liquid, its surface unnaturally still. He was chanting, words too low to hear, but their rhythm made Elias's wolf bristle with revulsion. As Elias watched, the surface of the liquid in the bowl shivered, not from a draft, but from within. A single perfect ripple expanded from the center, and in its wake a faint crimson light pulsed once, then died. A sympathetic echo. He had just taken a direct reading of Maya's scar, its location confirmed, its potency measured. "Found what you were looking for, scholar?" Elias's voice echoed in the cramped space, cold as the grave. Vesper did not startle. He rose slowly, turning with an eerie calm. His stagnant pool eyes held no fear, only a fanatic's fervent satisfaction. "Alpha King Elias, I was just studying the fascinating mineral deposits in your foundation. The resonance here is unique." "The only deposit you'll find is your own body in the cold earth if you do not explain yourself now." Elias let his alpha power roll forward, a crushing wave of dominance meant to force submission. Vesper's knees buckled slightly, but his smile remained, a ghastly thing. "Your power is impressive, like a great roaring fire. But some things, Your Majesty, are not cowed by flame. Some things are older and quieter, and they drink the light." He gestured with the bowl. "The lost princess sings in her tower of pain. Her song is a beacon. You cannot silence it. You can only choose whether to be consumed in the conflagration when the rightful heirs come to claim their key." Princess. The word was a lightning strike. They didn't just see her as an heir, they saw her as royalty to be rescued, a figurehead for their apocalyptic revival. "There are no rightful heirs to a condemned line," Elias snarled, taking a step forward. "The world condemns, history redeems," Vesper whispered, his eyes gleaming. "The new moon approaches, the devourer stirs in its sleep, it dreams of her blood, and it is hungry." With a sudden, surprising move, he dashed the contents of the bowl against the stone wall. The liquid, smelling of iron and ozone, sizzled and vanished, taking its evidence with it. "My work here is done. The location is confirmed. The Covenant of the Crimson Moon thanks you for your hospitality." Before Elias could lunge, Vesper spat a word that was not a word, a guttural syllable of negation. The air around him warped, a brief disorienting shimmer, and when it cleared, the passage was empty, save for the fading stench of his magic and the echoing, ghostly whisper of his final threat. Elias stood alone in the dark, his heart a drum of war. The shield of his territory had been fractured. The enemy wasn't at the gates. They had walked the halls, performed dark rites in the belly of his home, and vanished with the knowledge they sought. The hunt was over. The next phase was the assault, and Vesper's words hung in the stagnant air, a prophecy more concrete than any of his olds. "The devourer stirs in its sleep. It dreams of her blood." Upstairs, Maya was the dreamer in a nightmare not her own, and Elias, the Alpha King, had just been served notice. The time for hiding was through. The time for war had begun. Chapter 8: The Alpha's Gambit and the Unwilling Pawn. The lodge, once a sanctuary of stone and fire, now felt like a gilded cage under siege. Vesper's disappearance was not subtle. He simply failed to appear at morning meal. The guards at the main gates swore he never left. He had evaporated, a ghost who had confirmed the presence of a greater phantom. The knowledge was a virus, and Elias could feel it spreading in the wary glances of his people, in the renewed, hushed intensity of the council elders who took breakfast in the hall. Ilara's voice was a needle of frost. "A guest has vanished, Elias, under your roof. This does not inspire confidence in your security." Elias, forcing down the urge to snarl, kept his tone diplomatic steel. "A wandering scholar likely found our winter not to his liking and departed without ceremony. Should I muster the pack to hunt for a man who may simply be rude?" Thorn grunted, his flinty eyes boring into Elias. "Isolde spoke of fog. Now we have disappearing acts. The air here is thick with more than hearth smoke, boy." The use of boy was a deliberate provocation, a reminder of his relative youth, and now his perceived instability. The pressure was a vice. He could not wait for the cult to make their move. He had to act, and the only path forward was the one laid out by the terrified archivist, Silas, the gamble of a lifetime. He summoned Kieran to the war room at half-noon, the weak winter sun doing little to dispel the gloom. "I am leaving for the Blood Moon grounds," Elias stated, his voice leaving no room for debate. Kieran's stoic composure cracked. "Alone? Elias, that is madness. It's forbidden land, crawling with who knows what remnants, and the council. The council cannot know, and I will not be alone. I am taking Maya." Kieran stared at him as if he had grown a second head. "You are taking the key to the apocalypse, to the door of the apocalypse? Have the ghosts in the well driven you insane?" "Listen to me," Elias said, gripping the edge of the map table until the wood groaned. "The scar is a link. They are tracking her pain, her fear, her very presence here. As long as she is within these walls, we are a target painted on a mountain. We are sitting ducks waiting for a siege we cannot win without exposing her and tearing the pack apart in civil war." He pointed to the crimson crescent on the map. "But out there, we move the battlefield, we draw the hunters away from our people, and we take the fight to the source of the curse." "To do what?" Kieran demanded, his loyalty straining against the sheer recklessness of the plan. to try what Silas spoke of, Elias admitted, the words heavy as tombstones. A counter-ritual, a royal sacrifice of authority to rebind the echo. It is the only theoretical alternative to her death or the unleashing of the devourer. Kieran was silent for a long, terrible moment. Theoretical? You would risk your life, your bond, your crown on a scholar's theory? What is my crown worth if I wear it while a woman under my protection is ritually slaughtered to end the world? What is my authority if I only use it to uphold laws that demand innocence be sacrificed for the sins of the dead? He leaned forward. I need you to hold Silvercrest. You must be my voice, my presence. Tell them I am patrolling the far borders due to the stranger's suspicious departure. Buy me 3 days, no more. The weight of the trust settled on Kieran's broad shoulders. He finally gave a slow, grim nod. 3 days. On the dawn of the 4th, if you are not back, I will come for you, and I will bring the entire pack. Council be damned. The hardest part was yet to come, telling Maya. He found her standing by the window, as always, but she was not looking out. She was staring at her own reflection in the glass, a stranger wrapped in a king's cloak. She turned as he entered, and he saw she had been crying, the tears leaving clean tracks through the pallor of her face. He's gone, isn't he? The hunter. And now they are coming. Yes, Elias said, refusing to sugarcoat it. So we are leaving. She blinked, uncomprehending. Leaving? To where? To the source of your pain, to the blood moon grounds. The color drained from her face completely, leaving her as white as the snow outside. She stumbled back a step. No, no, you cannot. That is what they want. They will be waiting. It is a trap. It is all a trap. Elias's control slipped, his voice rising with passionate intensity. Staying here is a trap. Dying here is a trap. Running forever is a trap. The only way out is through. He stepped closer, his gaze holding hers prisoner. There is a chance, Maya, a slim, desperate chance to break the link, to silence the echo in the stones forever. But it must be done at the source, and it requires both of us. She shook her head violently, a caged animal. You don't understand. The moment I step onto that ground, the mark, it will be like setting my soul on fire. The pull, it will be agony. I won't be me anymore. I'll just be a key screaming to be turned. Then I will carry you, he vowed, the words raw and unfiltered. And when the pain becomes too much, I will bear it with you, but I will not leave you to face this curse alone in a room waiting for the end. I am your alpha, and my pack does not face the darkness alone. The word pack hung between them. She was not officially part of it. She never could be by council law. But in that moment, in the way he said it, it was not a legal designation. It was a truth of the spirit. She searched his face, looking for the lie, the trick. She found only a terrifying, unwavering resolve. He was not offering safety. He was offering a shared descent into hell. Her resistance crumbled, not into submission, but into a shaky, terrifying resolve of her own. The ghost was being asked to become a warrior. The key was being asked to become a weapon against its own purpose. When, she whispered, the word a breath of frost. Tonight, he said, under the cover of the new moon's darkness. The hook was set deeper than ever. The king was abandoning his throne. The prey was walking toward the hunter's lair, and a bond, fragile and forbidden, was being forged in the fires of a shared, potentially doomed gambit. The story was no longer about hiding. It was about a perilous, deliberate journey into the very heart of the nightmare. Chapter 9. The Northern Wastes and the Song of Stones. They left Silvercrest as the last indigo bledded from the sky, swallowed by a moonless, star-pricked black. Elias was a shadow in practical dark travel leathers, a pack of supplies on his back, 2 wicked blades at his hips. Maya was a sliver of a ghost beside him, wrapped in a hooded cloak of gray wool that blended with the rocky landscape. She moved with a silent, aching grace, but every step north was a visible torment. The further they traveled from the lodge, the tighter she clutched her side, her breathing a shallow, pained rhythm. "It's getting worse," Elias stated, kneeling before her. It wasn't a question. She nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Her eyes were wide, the pupils dilated with suffering. "It's a pulling, like a fishhook buried in my ribs, and the line is tied to a mountain, and the mountain is calling it home," she gasped, her hand pressing hard over the hidden scar. "It doesn't just hurt, it sings, a terrible, wrong song." Elias made a decision. He rummaged in his pack and pulled out a small, wax-sealed vial containing a thick, silvery paste. "Moon mint and dream root salve. It won't stop the pain, but it will dampen the connection, muffle the song." He held it out. "You must apply it directly." Her gaze flicked from the vial to his face, shame and necessity warring. Turning her back to him, she fumbled with her clothes, her fingers shaking too violently to manage the clasp. With a soft, frustrated sob, she gave up, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "Let me," he said, his voice devoid of any inflection that could add to her humiliation. He moved behind her. With clinical, swift movements, he parted the fabric. The sight of the scar in the stark starlight made his stomach clench. It was angry, pulsing with that sickly phosphorescence, the dark blood beating like obsidian tears. The air around it tasted of ozone and old grief. He applied the salve, his touch as light as he could make it. The paste sizzled faintly on contact, emitting a scent of frost and chamomile that fought the curse's metallic reek. Maya flinched, then let out a shuddering sob as some of the violent pulling tension eased, from a raging torrent to a heavy, insistent tide. "Thank you," she breathed, the words barely audible as she quickly readjusted her clothing. He simply nodded, resealing the vial. The intimacy of the act hung in the frozen air, a new, fragile thread in the web between them, not of romance, but of profound, desperate care. They pressed on. The landscape grew more desolate, the trees thinning to naked, twisted sentinels before vanishing altogether. They entered the northern wastes, a vast, rolling expanse of snow and scree, dotted with jagged boulders that looked like the broken teeth of the earth. The wind here had a voice, a constant, mournful keen that spoke of loneliness and ancient death. And then, as the first gray light of pre-dawn smudged the eastern horizon, they saw them, the standing stones of the blood moon. Or what was left of them. They were not majestic, not anymore. They were ruins, great monoliths of speckled granite toppled and strewn like a giant's discarded toys across a shallow, snow-filled basin. Some were split cleanly in two, others lay half-buried in the frozen earth, but their arrangement, even in destruction, hinted at a once deliberate, powerful pattern, a pattern that now felt like a shattered incantation. At the center of the chaos lay a slab of metal darker than the surrounding stone, pitted and scarred, but unnaturally free of snow, the altar. The moment Maya's foot touched the basin's rim, she cried out, a raw, animal sound of agony. She collapsed to her knees, doubling over. The salve's protection was nothing against the proximity to the source. The scar on her side blazed with light so bright it shone through her layers of clothing, a crimson beacon in the gloom. The song she described was now a deafening scream only she could hear, a psychic shockwave of malevolent history. Elias caught her before she could faceplant into the snow, pulling her against his chest. She trembled violently, her breaths coming in ragged, tearing gasps. I can't go in there. It will kill me before they even arrive." He looked from her tormented face to the field of shattered stones. This was the heart of the curse. This was where her grandfather had carved that hateful sigil into her infant skin. The very air was poisoned with memory and magic gone rotten. But it was also, according to Silas, the only place where it could end. "You don't have to go in," Elias said, his voice a low, steady rumble against her ear. "Not yet." He lifted her, cradling her against him, and carried her not into the basin, but to a shallow, cave-like overhang formed by two fallen monoliths on the basin's edge. It offered meager shelter from the wind, and, more importantly, concealment. He settled her there, wrapping her tightly in both their cloaks. "Stay here. Conserve your strength. I need to understand the battlefield." Her hand shot out, gripping his wrist with surprising strength. Her eyes, glassy with pain, held his. "Be careful. The stones, they remember. They hate." He covered her hand with his own for a brief, solid moment, then slipped away, a gray wraith moving into the realm of broken giants. Alone among the toppled stones, the silence was different. It was a listening silence. The wind's keen seemed to form words in a dead language. The shadows between the rocks felt watchful. He approached the central altar, the meteoric iron slab. Even without touching it, he felt a deep, resonant cold emanating from it, a vacuum that pulled at the warmth of his life force. This was the lock. This was where her blood was meant to fall. As he circled it, his boot scuffed against something half buried in the frozen dirt. Not a stone, a bone, a wolf's femur, old and polished by time, and another, and another. The ground was littered with them, a silent, grim testimony to the cleansing that had taken place. Victory looked like a boneyard. A new scent, faint but unmistakable, threaded through the dry, cold air. Not vespers. This was older, muskier, the scent of wolves who lived in deep caves and deeper faith. They were close. The alpha cult had beaten them here, or had never left. The hook of the chapter was not question, but a dreadful setting of the stage. The king and his charge had reached the dragon's lair. The key was screaming in the lock, and in the jagged shadows of the fallen stones, the worshippers of the devourer were waiting, their prayers already a whisper on the cruel wind. The final act was ready to begin, not at Silvercrest, but here, on this blighted, sacred ground, where blood called to blood, and an alpha's vow was about to be tested against the oldest of magics. Chapter 10: The Covenant in the Shadows. The pale dawn light did nothing to warm the blood moon basin, it only etched the ruins in sharper, crueler relief. Elias retreated from the altar, the bone chill of the iron slab clinging to him. He moved with a predator's silence back to the overhang where Maya lay. She was conscious, but her eyes were glazed, fixed on some inner horror. The scar's light had dimmed to a throbbing ember beneath her clothes, but the cost was written in the sweat on her brow and the tremors that still racked her frame. "They're here," he whispered, crouching beside her. Not in the open, hiding, waiting for the moon. She swallowed hard, a dry, painful sound. "How many?" "Scents are mingled with the stone and the old death. At least a dozen, maybe more." He placed a hand on her shoulder, forcing her to focus on him. "I have until nightfall. We need a plan. Silas spoke of a counter-ritual. I need you to tell me everything you know about the original. Any words, any steps, any symbols." A shudder ran through her. "I was a child. It was pain and darkness and chanting. My grandfather's voice. It was full of madness and love. A terrible love." She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to claw the memory from the depths of trauma. There was a circle, drawn in ash and salt, not around the altar, around me. I was the center. The words, They weren't just spoken, they were woven. Each word felt like a thread being pulled through my skin. She opened her eyes, a new, specific horror dawning. The final line, he chanted it as he carved. By blood bound, by stone crowned, let the air's pain be the kingdom's chain. Elias committed it to memory. By blood bound, by stone crowned, let the air's pain be the kingdom's chain. It was a perversion of a royal oath. Instead of the king's strength being the pack's shield, the heir's agony was the cult's leverage. The counter-ritual, he pressed gently. If it mirrors but inverts, the circle would be around the altar. The words, a reversal of intent. Instead of binding pain, it would seek to transmute it, to take that chain and break it, not by cutting it, but by changing its nature. Maya looked at him with a dawning, terrified awe. You would have to stand in the center. You would have to speak the reversal and the sacrifice of authority. What does that even mean? It means, a new, grating voice said from the mouth of their shelter, that the Alpha King must willingly lower the shield of his command. He must make himself for a moment not a king, but a wolf, a lone wolf, vulnerable to the very chaos he seeks to rebind. Vesper stood there, not alone. Flanking him were 4 figures clad in ragged robes of gray and crimson, their hoods thrown back to reveal faces etched with fervor and deprivation. They had approached without a sound, materializing from the maze of stones like ghosts. The gaunt scholar's eyes were alight with a feverish triumph. Elias was on his feet in an instant, placing his body between Maya and the intruders. His hand went to his blade. You are trespassing on forbidden ground. We are on holy ground, Vesper corrected, spreading his hands. You are the trespasser, King, and you have brought us our sacrament. His gaze slid to Maya, hungry and reverent. Princess, the stones sing for you. Can you not hear them? They have been silent for so long. Maya pushed herself upright, leaning against the cold stone for support. Her voice, though weak, was clear. I am no princess of yours. I am a wolf who wants to be free. Freedom? One of the other cultists, a woman with hair white as the snow and eyes like black pits, laughed, a dry, rasping sound. You are the key to the true freedom of our kind, the freedom from weak bonds, from corrupt councils, from the lie of civilized pacts. The devourer will cleanse the world, and from the ashes the strong, the truly strong, will rise, unshackled. Elias assessed them, 5 here, more in the stones. He and Maya were outnumbered, and she was incapacitated. Direct combat was suicide. He had to think like a king, not just a warrior. He had to negotiate from a position of perceived weakness. You speak of strength, Elias said, his tone shifting to one of cool, diplomatic analysis. Yet you skulk in shadows. You prey on a wounded she-wolf. Where is the strength in that? He took a deliberate step forward, forcing Vesper to look at him, not Maya. The devourer, you call it? Silas, the archivist, called it the devourer of lines. It unravels pack bonds. Tell me, zealot, what is a wolf without its pack? Even the loner knows the moon's pull. This thing you worship would make us less than wolves. It would make us meat, screaming, isolated meat. The white-haired woman snarled, but Vesper held up a hand, his intellectual curiosity seemingly piqued by the argument. You see the loss, we see the purity. No more politics, no more weak alphas poisoning the bloodlines with mercy, just power, raw and undeniable. And who wields this raw power? You? Will you command the devourer? Or will you be the first it consumes when there are no more chains to hold it? He saw a flicker of doubt in the eyes of a younger cultist behind Vesper. You have been taught a fairy tale of glory. I am telling you the truth of extinction. Look at this place. He gestured to the scattered bones. This is what your cleansing looks like. Not a new world, a graveyard. Vesper's smile returned, thinner now. Eloquent, King, a last grasp at reason, but faith does not bargain with logic. The moon rises tonight, the alignment is perfect, the princess's blood is the final ingredient. You cannot stop the tide with words. He nodded to his followers. Take her, gently. She must be strong for the ceremony. The cultists moved forward. Elias's blades sang as they cleared their sheaths. The first one to touch her loses their hands. A standoff, but Elias knew it was temporary. More rustling in the stones announced the arrival of the rest of the covenant. 8 more figures emerged, surrounding the overhang. They were trapped. Maya's hand touched his back, a faint pressure. Her voice was a breath in his ear, barely audible. The plan. You need to be at the altar, not here. She was right. They had to get to the center. The counter-ritual was their only hope. But to get there, they would have to walk through the jaws of the cult. Elias made a decision. He lowered his blades, not surrendering them, but pointing them downward, a gesture of temporary ceasefire. You want a ceremony? Then let it be a true one, not a slaughter in a hole. Take us to the altar. Let the princess walk to her destiny, as is fitting for royalty, and let the Alpha King bear witness to the end of his world. He infused his voice with a false, grim resignation. You have won. Let it be done with dignity. Vesper studied him, suspicion and grandiosity warring on his face. The idea of a formal, witnessed ceremony, of the Alpha King's defeated presence, was clearly a tempting piece of theater for his fanatical narrative. Finally, he gave a slow, regal nod. Very well, walk then, to the heart of the new world. The circle of cultists parted, forming a grim avenue leading down into the basin, toward the dark iron slab. Elias sheathed one blade, keeping the other in hand. He offered his arm to Maya, not as a captor, but as an escort. Her fingers, cold as ice, closed around his forearm. She leaned on him, not just in pretense, but in utter necessity. Together, they stepped out of the shallow shelter and began the long, slow walk through the gauntlet of hungry eyes toward the altar where their fate, and perhaps the fate of all wolfkind, would be decided. The hook was extricating, the king and the key walking willingly into the lion's den, their only weapon a desperate, untested theory, and a bond forged in days, not decades. The stage was set. The players were in position. All that remained was for the moon to rise, and for the final, deadly act to begin. Chapter 11. The Circle of Ash and Salt. The walk to the altar was a procession of nightmares. The cultists, now numbering over 20, formed a silent chanting corridor, their low guttural hum vibrating through the frozen earth and up through Elias's boots. It was a sound that bypassed the ears and spoke directly to the primal fear in the marrow. Maya leaned heavier on him with each step, her breath a ragged whistle. The scar's light pulsed in time with the chant, a visible, agonizing synchronization. They reached the cleared circle around the meteoritic slab. Up close, the altar was even more sinister. The metal was not simply dark, it seemed to swallow the weak daylight, a void in the shape of a stone. Strange, twisting runes were etched into its surface, not carved by tools, but seemingly grown into the iron, like metallic scars. Vesper moved to the altar's head, his gaunt face transformed by ecstatic fervor. Here, on the throat of the old world, the new one will draw its first breath. He produced a pouch and began to pour a mixture of gray ash and white salt in a wide circle around the altar's perimeter, mirroring the very memory Maya had dredged up. The cultists' chanting rose in pitch, a crescendo of anticipation. Elias helped Maya to sit on a low, flat stone just outside the emerging circle. Her eyes were glued to the ritual, trapped in a waking flashback. "The circle," she whispered. "He's drawing the circle." "Look at me, Maya," Elias commanded softly. His golden eyes held hers, an anchor in her storm. Remember what we discussed, the reversal. When the time comes, you must not look at them. You must look at the stones, at the sky, anywhere but the altar. Your pain is their weapon. Do not give them the sight of it in your eyes. She gave a tiny, terrified nod, her fingers digging into his forearm. And you, the sacrifice? I know what I must do, though the full reality of it was a cold knot in his stomach. Sacrificing his authority meant willingly dropping the psychic shield that made him alpha. In this place, surrounded by this magic, it would be like opening his veins in a pool of piranhas. Two cultists moved toward Maya. Elias stood, a growl rumbling in his chest. She walks on her own, or your ceremony ends now with my steel in your heart. Vesper's eyes narrowed, but he waved the men back. Maya, summoning a reservoir of will Elias could only marvel at, pushed herself to her feet. She let go of his arm and, back straight as a queen's, stepped over the line of ash and salt into the circle. A collective sigh of rapture went through the covenant. The moment her feet touched the ground inside, the scar on her side blazed anew, a crimson star. She cried out, staggering, but did not fall. "Find her," Vesper ordered. This time, Elias could not stop them. Two more cultists entered the circle with coils of rough black rope. They didn't tie her hands, but looped the rope around her waist, a symbolic tether, its other end held by the white-haired woman just outside the circle. It was a ritual binding, representing her connection to the cult's will. Vesper raised his arms to the darkening sky. The sun was a memory on the horizon. The first stars were pricking through the deep violet. The moon, though invisible, felt like a physical pressure, a coming absence with monstrous weight. "The hour approaches," Vesper cried. "Prepare the vessel." Elias's mind raced. This was the moment. The ritual was beginning. He had to act before they moved to the final, bloody act. Silas's words echoed. A royal sacrifice of authority to retune the echo. He stepped forward to the very edge of the ash and salt circle. All eyes turned to him. "You wish for a true ceremony," Elias's voice boomed, using his alpha tone not to command, but to seize attention. "You wish for the old world to witness its end? Then witness this first." Before Vesper could react, Elias did the unthinkable. He stepped across the circle's boundary. A shockwave of disorientation hit him. It was not a physical barrier, but a metaphysical one. The moment he crossed, the constant low-level connection to his pack, the distant hum of their minds, the sense of their well-being that was the background music of his existence, muted. It was still there, but faint, as if he heard it from underwater. It was a terrifying, lonely sensation. This was the first taste of the sacrifice. The cultists stared, confused. This was not in their scripture. Elias walked to the center of the circle, stopping between Maya and the dark altar. He turned to face Vesper. "You speak of chains of pain," he said, his voice still powerful, but now lacking the underpinning resonance of his authority. It was just a voice. But there are other chains, chains of duty, chains of choice. He looked at Maya, her face a mask of pain and confusion, then back to the leader of the cult. "Tonight, you will see which chain is stronger." He was making it up as he went, weaving his own ritual from instinct and desperation. He lowered himself to one knee, placing his bare hands flat on the frozen ground inside the circle, on either side of the sinister altar. The cold was instant and biting. "You want a sacrifice?" Elias thundered, lifting his gaze to the darkening sky. "Then have mine, not of blood, but of dominion. I, Elias Blackwood, Alpha King of Silvercrest, shed my authority here. I step down from my throne, in this circle, under this sky." As he spoke the words, he did the internal, agonizing work of it. He didn't just say he was shedding authority, he consciously, willingly released it. He pictured the psychic tether to Kieran, to his pack, and he let it go slack. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. A visible tremor went through the circle, the ash and salt lines shimmered, the chanting cultists faltered, their rhythm broken. The very air grew heavier, charged with a new, unstable energy. Elias felt brutally exposed, naked in his soul. The comforting weight of kingship was gone, replaced by a howling void. And into that void rushed the echo of the stones, the grief, the madness, the screaming pain of the ancient magic and the slaughtered blood moon wolves. It was a tsunami of psychic noise, and he was a bare cliff face before it. Vesper's eyes widened in dawning, horrified understanding. "No, you fool! You are not the sacrifice! You are polluting the rite!" But it was too late. Elias had thrown a wrench of pure, self-sacrificial will into their meticulously prepared machinery. The stage was no longer solely theirs. The hook of the chapter was the king, brought to his knees not in submission, but in a devastating, voluntary surrender that had thrown the entire ritual into chaotic, unpredictable disarray. The moon was about to rise on a scene no one, not the cult, not Maya, and not even Elias, could have predicted. Chapter 12: The Howling Void and the Unraveling. The release of his authority was not a quiet act. It was a psychic detonation contained within the circle of ash and salt. The very stones of the blood moon grounds seemed to groan in response, a deep seismic shudder that vibrated up through Elias's knees and into his bones. The cultists' chanting dissolved into shouts of confusion and alarm. Vesper's face contorted with rage. "He has broken the sequence. The purity is tainted." He pointed a trembling finger at Elias, still kneeling at the altar's edge. "Remove him! Tear him from the circle!" But the moment the two nearest cultists tried to cross the ash and salt line to grab Elias, something repelled them. A crackling, visible energy, a blend of the released alpha authority and the disturbed ritual magic, flared along the boundary, throwing them back with yelps of pain. The circle, designed to contain and focus sacrificial power, was now holding Elias's sacrifice within it, creating a volatile, hybridized field. He was trapped, but so were they, unable to reach him without being burned by the chaotic forces he'd unleashed. Inside the maelstrom, Elias was drowning. The echo of the stones was no longer a distant song, it was a cacophony inside his skull. He saw flashes, not visions but impressions, the gleam of a carving knife in firelight, the terror in a young she-wolf's eyes, Maya's mother perhaps, the triumphant snarl of his own grandfather leading the purge. The grief of the slaughtered and the rage of the purgers swirled together, a tornado of historical pain with him at its eye. This was what the cult wanted to unleash upon the world. He fought to hold on to one thread, Maya. Through the psychic storm, he turned his head. She was still standing, held upright only by the symbolic rope and her own fraying will. Her eyes were locked on him, wide with an understanding that went beyond fear. She saw what he was enduring. She saw the king vanishing, leaving only a wolf in agony. And in that look, he saw not pity, but a fierce answering solidarity. She was with him in the storm.
Vesper, realizing brute force was useless, scrambled to salvage the ritual. "Ignore him. The key is still here. The moon is rising. Proceed to the final invocation. His suffering will only add spice to the offering." His voice was shrill, desperate. The white-haired woman holding Maya's tether began a new chant, older and more guttural than the last. The other cultists, though shaken, took it up. Their combined will focused back on Maya, intensifying the pull on the scar. She screamed, a sound that tore through the chaotic noise and lanced straight into Elias's heart. The pain broke through his paralysis. No, this was not the plan. The sacrifice was meant to rebind the echo, not just add to the chaos. He had to direct it. He had to speak the reversal. Gritting his teeth against the psychic onslaught, he forced his head up toward the sliver of moon now peeking over the jagged horizon, a curved claw of pale light. Using the last vestige of his will, not his alpha power but his personal, stubborn spirit, he shouted into the maelstrom. He had no ancient words, only the truth of his intent. "You want chains?" he roared, his voice raw. "Then chain this. Take the king's abandoned throne. Take the alpha's silent howl. Take it and let it fill the hollow places. Let this loneliness be the wall, not the weapon." It was instinct, not incantation, but as the words left him, aimed at the hungry, echoing magic of the place, something shifted. The chaotic pressure around him didn't lessen, but it changed. It began to swirl toward the altar, not as a wild storm, but as a directed current, drawn to the vacuum of his relinquished authority. Vesper shrieked, "What are you doing? Stop your mouth!" But Elias was just beginning. He remembered Maya's fragment. By blood bound, by stone crowned, let the air's pain be the kingdom's chain. He had to invert it. He looked at Maya, her body arched in agony, and poured every ounce of his intention into his voice, now a ragged, powerful thing. By choice bound, by will crowned, let the air's peace be the kingdom's key. He shouted the last word as a command, a plea, a prayer. As he did the final, unthinkable thing. He reached out, not physically, but with the essence of that released authority, the lonely, howling void where his kingship had been, and he offered it not to the devourer, but to her, to Maya, not as a burden, but as a shield, a fortress made of silence. The effect was instantaneous and dramatic. The swirling energy around the altar slammed into the meteoric slab. The dark metal rang with a deafening, discordant chime that shook the ground. The cultists' chanting cut off as if severed by a blade. The rope around Maya's waist turned to brittle ash and fell away, and her scream stopped. She gasped, staggering but not falling. The blazing light from her scar didn't vanish, but its color changed. It softened from an angry, bloody crimson to a deep, vibrant gold, the color of Elias's eyes, the color of an alpha protective power. The unbearable pulling sensation was gone, replaced by a warm, solid anchoring. The link was still there, but its nature had been transmuted. It was no longer a chain to a curse. It was a tether to a sanctuary. The chapter's hook was a moment of breathtaking, costly victory. The king had poured his very identity into the abyss to reshape it. The ritual was broken, hijacked, transformed. But as Elias knelt, utterly spent, the void inside him a yawning chasm, he saw Vesper's rage solidify into something even more dangerous, a fanatic's decision to scorch the earth. The ritual had failed, but the cultists were still here, armed, and their dream had just been shattered before their eyes. The unraveling of magic was over. Now would come the unraveling of flesh and bone. Chapter 13: The Scattering and the Stand. The silence that followed the altar's chime was profound, broken only by the whistling wind and Maya's ragged, shocked breathing. The gold light emanating from her scar pulsed gently, a beacon in the ruined basin. Vesper stood frozen, his face a monument to shattered dogma. Then it cracked into pure, undiluted fury. "Heretic, defiler, you have corrupted the sacrament." His voice was a blade of ice. "If the pure unlocking is denied, then we shall offer a different sacrifice. We shall give the devourer the flesh of the tyrant king and his corrupted princess together. Their combined blood might yet be enough to force the door." The cultists, their fervor twisted into rage, drew an assortment of cruel, archaic blades and cudgels. The intellectual veneer was gone, replaced by the raw, murderous impulse at the cult's core. They began to advance, not with ritual precision, but with the hungry intent of a pack moving in for the kill. Elias was empty. The psychic battering had left him drained, his senses dulled, his body leaden. The void where his authority had been was a sucking wound. He tried to rise, to draw his blade, but his limbs responded with frustrating sluggishness. He was not the Alpha King here. He was just Elias, and he was spent. Maya saw it. She saw his struggle, the hollowed-out look in his eyes, and something in her broke, not into fear, but into fury. A lifetime of running, of cowering, of being a passive key, a weeping scar, boiled over. The warm, anchoring gold light in her side flared. No! The word was not a scream, but a roar, a true wolf's roar, full-throated and powerful, that echoed off the standing stones with shocking force. It was a sound of ownership, of territory, of defiance. It was the sound of a she-wolf who had found something to fight for. The advancing cultists hesitated, stunned by the ferocity from the broken creature they had seen only as a vessel. Maya stepped forward, placing herself between the kneeling Elias and the cult. Her posture was no longer that of a victim. It was low, centered, predatory. The gold light from her scar reflected in her eyes, which were no longer frozen, but burning. "You have taken my family," she snarled, her voice thick with grief turned to wrath. "You have hunted me like an animal. You have used my pain as your prayer. You will not touch him." She had no weapon. She had only her body, her will, and the strange, borrowed strength of the transmuted magic now anchored to her soul. The white-haired cultist laughed, a brittle sound. "Little Key, you think a pretty light makes you a warrior?" She lunged, her blade aiming for Maya's heart. Maya didn't dodge. She moved in. It was not a trained fighter's move, but a wolf's desperate, instinctual counter. She caught her woman's wrist, the impact jarring up her own arm, and used her momentum to throw her off balance, sending her stumbling past into the dirt. It was clumsy, but it was effective. The act broke the spell of hesitation. The cultists surged forward in a wave.
Elias, watching through a haze of exhaustion, felt a new emotion spear through the void. Panic, not for himself, but for her. With a guttural groan, he forced himself to his feet, his sword finally clearing its sheath. He would die here, but he would not let her die first. Just as the first cultist reached Maya, a new sound split the night, a chorus of howls. Not the mad chants of the cult, but the clean, fierce hunting cries of a true pack. From the rim of the basin, shadows detached themselves from the greater darkness and poured down the slopes. Wolves, dozens of them, and at their head, a massive gray warrior with a familiar, steadfast gaze. Kieran. He had not waited for the fourth dawn. The severed feeling of Elias's authority, the psychic shockwave of his sacrifice, had been a beacon of ultimate distress. Kieran had felt his alpha's crown shatter across the bond. He had come, with every warrior he could muster, in a forced march of desperate loyalty. The Silvercrest warriors hit the disorganized cultists like a thunderbolt. The basin erupted into chaos, the clash of steel, the snarls of wolves, the cries of the wounded. The cult's fanaticism was no match for the disciplined fury of a pack defending its king. Kieran carved a path through the melee straight to Elias, cutting down a cultist who lunged at his alpha's unguarded back. "I told you I would come," he shouted over the din, his eyes scanning Elias's drained face with deep concern. Elias could only nod, swaying on his feet. His focus was across the fray, on Maya. A cultist had grabbed her from behind, his arm around her neck. As Elias watched helpless, Maya didn't struggle. She went utterly still. Then she threw her head back, smashing it into the cultist's face. He reeled, and she drove her elbow into his gut, breaking his hold. She turned, her face a mask of primal rage, and shoved him backwards, directly into the path of the charging white-haired woman. They went down in a tangle. She was fighting, not with skill, but with a terrifying, untamed will to survive, to protect. The tide turned swiftly. The cultists, for all their zeal, were not an army. They were assassins and ritualists. Against Kieran's warriors they were slaughtered or scattered into the dark maze of toppled stones. Vesper, seeing his dream dissolve, gave a final, inarticulate cry of rage and fled into the shadows, abandoning his followers to their fate. As the last sounds of combat faded, replaced by the moans of the wounded and the heavy breathing of the victors, Elias finally let his sword tip drop to the earth. He stood amidst the wreckage of the ritual and the battle, the void inside him aching. He had won. Maya was alive, unbound. The cult was broken. But he looked at Kieran, at his warriors, and he felt nothing. No surge of pride, no relief, no connection. The sacrifice was complete. The king was gone. The hook of this chapter was not a triumph, but a hollowing. The threat was vanquished, but at a cost so personal and profound that Elias Blackwood stood alone in a crowd of his own loyal pack, a stranger to himself, wondering if the man who had made the choice could ever truly return from the void he had created to save them all. Chapter 14. The Crown of Scar Tissue. The journey back to Silvercrest was a silent, somber procession under a sky heavy with unshed snow. The wounded were carried on makeshift litters. The dead, both cultist and Silvercrest warrior, were wrapped with a solemn dignity. Elias walked among them, a ghost in his own life. He could feel the pack's gaze on him, a mixture of awe, concern, and a deep, unsettled confusion. They had felt it. Every wolf with a strong enough bond to their alpha had felt the moment his authority was not just challenged, but relinquished. It was an existential tremor in the fabric of their shared spirit. They saw the physical exhaustion etched into his face, but the deeper wound was invisible to them, a hollowed-out castle where a king once lived. Maya walked beside Kieran, who had appointed himself her protector. The golden light from her scar had faded to a soft, warm glow, barely visible through her clothes, like a banked hearth. She was physically unscathed from the fight, but her eyes were haunted by a new kind of storm, the aftermath of violence, the shock of her own defiance, and a constant, worried flicker towards Elias. They reached the lodge as true dawn broke, a pale and cheerless light. The council elders were waiting on the steps, their faces carved from stone. Thorn, Ilara, Cedric. The news of the battle at the Blood Moon grounds had run ahead of them on swift paws. Elias did not wait for them to speak. He stopped at the base of the steps and looked up at them, his voice flat, devoid of its former resonant command. The Blood Moon cult is broken. Their leader, Vesper, is fled. The threat is ended. Ilara's sharp eyes missed nothing. At what cost, Elias? We felt a rupture. The pack bond is thin, frayed. What did you do? What was necessary? Elias's answer was simple, final. Thorn stepped down, his flinty gaze boring into him, then shifting to Maya, who stood slightly behind Kieran. And the she-wolf, the hidden flame, is the ember finally extinguished? Maya, to everyone's surprise, stepped forward. She did not cower. The ghost was gone. In her place was a woman, weary but unbroken. The ember was never a threat. It was a wound that the Alpha King has healed. She placed a hand over her side. The link to the curse is now severed. The Blood Moon line is now truly, finally, just a memory, not a weapon. Cedric, the idealist, looked torn. By what right? By what law? This was a matter for the council to judge. The law, Elias said, finding a last spark of something, not authority, but conviction, demanded her death for the crime of her blood. The law saw a key to a door of destruction. I saw a wolf in chains. He finally met each elder's gaze. I chose to break the chains, not the wolf. The law failed her. My oath as her protector did not. A heavy silence fell. It was an outright rejection of their core doctrine. "You have compromised your authority," Thorne stated, not as an accusation, but as a grim fact. "The bond is weak. Can you even feel them, Elias?" He gestured to the returning warriors, to the pack beginning to gather in the courtyard, their faces etched with concern for their leader. Elias could only nod, swaying on his feet. His silence, the profound distance in his golden eyes, was answer enough. He could see them, he could hear them, but the deep, resonant connection, the symphony of their hearts that had been the foundation of his strength, was a faint echo. He had sacrificed the conduit to save the source.
"The Alpha King must be the heart of the pack," Alara said, her voice cold with a regretful finality. "If the heart cannot feel the blood it pumps, then the body grows weak. It becomes vulnerable." "What are you saying?" Kieran growled, stepping forward, a protective wall between Elias and the council. "I am saying," Alara continued, "that the position of Alpha King is not merely a title. It is a function, a necessary living function for the stability of all our allied packs. If that function is impaired, then the council must consider the welfare of the many." They were talking about abdication, forced retirement. Elias had expected it. The void inside him yawned wider, but it was a cold, accepting space. He had made his choice. "Wait." The voice was Maya's. She moved past Kieran, past all of them, to stand at Elias's side. She didn't touch him, but her presence was a solid thing. She looked at the elders, and then turned to face the growing crowd of pack members, the warriors who had fought for him, the mothers, the elders, the young ones. "You speak of a heart that cannot feel," she said, her voice gaining strength, carrying over the courtyard. "But what of a heart that feels too much? What of a heart that feels the pain of a single lost wolf so deeply that it is willing to break itself to spare her?" She turned her burning gaze back to the council. He did not lose his authority in battle. He gave it, willingly, as a sacrifice, not for power, but for peace, not for glory, but for grace. What kind of king does that? What kind of heart does that require? She paused, letting the question hang in the frigid air. "You felt a rupture. I felt a transfusion. He took the poison meant for me, and in its place, he gave me this." She gestured to her side, to the faint, warm glow of the sanctuary she carried within. "A sense of belonging I have never known, a safety that is not a cage. If that is the act of a weakened king, then perhaps strength has been misunderstood for generations." Then she did something that made the entire pack gasp. She turned to Elias and went down on one knee. It was not a submissive posture, but one of fealty, of profound, chosen loyalty. "My bond is not to a crown or a law. It is to the wolf who stood between me and the abyss. Where he leads, I will follow, even into the silence." A ripple went through the pack. Then another warrior, one who had fought at the Blood Moon grounds, stepped forward and knelt. Then another, and another. Not all at once, but a steady, growing trickle of those whose loyalty was to the spirit of the wolf, not just the institution of the king. Kieran looked at the council, his expression fierce with pride, and then he too, the mighty Beta, knelt beside Maya. Elias stood amidst them, the void in him trembling. He could not feel the old bond, but he could see this. He could see the choice they were making. It was not a bond bestowed by power, but one offered in respect, a crown not of authority, but of earned loyalty.
The council elders were stunned. Their legalistic world had no precedent for this. Thorns stared at the kneeling wolves, at Elias's hollowed face, at Maya's defiant, grateful one. The law said one thing, the heart of the pack, it seemed, was saying another. The hook of this chapter was not a battle, but a quiet, seismic shift. The king had fallen, but in his place something new was being offered, not a restoration, but a resurrection of a different kind. The final chapter would not decide his fate, it would reveal the shape of the future he had purchased with his shattered crown. Chapter 15. The New Dawn's Howl. A week passed. The Lodge of Silvercrest was a place of convalescence and quiet reckoning. The bodies of the fallen were honored under the winter moon. The wounded healed. The story of the Blood Moon Basin, of the king's sacrifice and the she-wolf's stand was told and retold, becoming legend in the space of days. Elias remained in the eye of the storm, a figure of profound stillness. The council elders, faced with the unequivocal display of the pack's chosen loyalty, had withdrawn into fierce, silent deliberation. The law was clear, but the will of the people, the true, beating heart of wolfkind, had spoken in a language older than any edict. He spent his days in the archives with Silas, not as a king, but as a scholar, trying to understand what he had done. The archivist, twitching with nervous excitement, pointed to crumbling texts. The old tales speak of it rarely. Aethelred's choice, the silent sovereign, an alpha who severs his own bond to absorb a coming darkness. It was considered a myth, a metaphor. You didn't just perform a counter-ritual, you enacted a primal archetype. "I am not your king, Silas," Elias said quietly, tracing the faded ink. "Not in the way that matters. I cannot lead them in the old way." "Perhaps," Silas whispered, his eyes gleaming, "they don't need the old way anymore." Maya, meanwhile, was learning to live without a knife at her back. The warm glow in her side was a constant, gentle reminder of the sanctuary she carried within. She no longer jumped at shadows. She began to help in the healing halls again, her touch still deft, but now her eyes met those of the patients, offering a quiet strength that had not been there before. The pack watched her, no longer with pity or suspicion, but with a wary, growing respect. She was the girl who stood her ground. She was the flame that had not consumed, but illuminated. On the 8th morning, with a fresh blanket of snow muting the world, the council summoned them, not to the formal hall, but to the secluded courtyard garden, the very place where the truth had first bled into the snow. Thorn, Alara, and Cedric stood together. Their expressions were unreadable, but the air of rigid judgment was gone, replaced by a weary, solemn gravity. Elias Blackwood, Maya of Nopak. He acknowledged her with a slight nod. "The council has deliberated. The law is unambiguous. An alpha who cannot fully bond cannot hold the supreme seat. It is a vulnerability we, as stewards of all packs, cannot sanction." Elias felt no disappointment, only a hollow confirmation. He nodded, ready to accept the verdict. "However," Alara cut in, her sharp eyes missing nothing, "the law was written for a world where such a sacrifice was unthinkable. It did not account a Count King who would trade his throne for a single life, and in so doing save countless more from a horror we had dismissed as a myth." She clasped her hands before her. "The pack's will is also a force of law. It is the older law, and they have chosen their side."
Cedric, the young idealist, spoke last, his voice earnest. "We cannot, in good conscience, declare you Alpha King, but we cannot, in good conscience, ask you to leave, or strip you of title while your people kneel for you." He took a deep breath. "Therefore, we propose a new covenant, not just for Silvercrest, but for all who will hear it." He produced a scroll, old vellum edged in silver. "The title of Alpha King, as a centralized seat of absolute authority, is hereby dissolved." A gasp went up from Kieran and the few others present.
In its place, Cedric continued, unfurling the scroll, we instate the guardian of the silent bond, a protector who leads not from a throne of power, but from a place of sacrifice, a watchman on the border between the known and the unknown. Your authority, Elias, will never again be the psychic command of the Alpha King. It will be the moral authority of the wolf who gave everything and asked nothing in return. You will be our guide in spirit, our shield in crisis, but you will not rule our daily lives. The packs will return to a council of equals, with you as its honored, silent first member. It was a revolutionary solution. It respected the broken bond by making it the very foundation of a new symbolic role. It acknowledged his sacrifice by enshrining it in their governing structure. Thorn looked at Elias. It is not a crown. It is a burden of a different kind, the burden of being a living reminder. Do you accept? Elias looked at the scroll, then at the faces around him. He looked at Kieran, whose eyes shone with fierce pride. He looked at Maya, who watched him with a breath held, her hand unconsciously over her golden scar. He thought of the void inside him. It was still there, a quiet, echoing space where the roar of the pack bond had been, but it was no longer empty. It was filled with the memory of their choice to kneel, filled with the warmth of Maya's hard-won peace, filled with the purpose of a duty redefined. I accept, he said, his voice finding a new kind of strength, quiet but unshakable. Not as a king, but as a guardian. Ilara then turned to Maya. And you are of a condemned bloodline, yet you carry a blessing born of a king's sacrifice. You have no pack, yet a pack has pledged to you. Your existence is a paradox our laws cannot solve. She paused. The position of pack historian and lorekeeper is vacant. It requires one who understands the weight of history, both dark and light, one who can remind us of the cost of hatred and the price of mercy. Do you accept? Maya stood stunned. It was a place, a true honorable place, not as a hidden ghost or a reclaimed princess, but as herself, a scholar of survival, a keeper of the very story that had reshaped the world. She looked at Elias, and he gave a single, slow nod. I accept, she said, her voice clear and sure. The formalities ended. The elders departed, leaving Elias and Maya alone in the garden where their intertwined destiny had begun. The snow fell, just as it had that fateful night, but the world was utterly different. The silent bond, Maya mused, looking at the space where she had once knelt bleeding. It suits you. And the lorekeeper suits you. You will teach them that some flames are meant to warm, not destroy. They stood in a comfortable silence, the new dynamic settling between them, not alpha and subject, not protector and charge, but two unique souls bound by a shared, terrible, and beautiful history. Allies. Friends. Does it hurt? She asked softly after a moment. The silence. Elias looked inward, at the quiet space. It did, he admitted. It felt like death. But now it feels like listening. I can hear other things. The wind in the pines. The beat of a single heart. He met her gaze. The turn of a new page. He offered his arm not as a support but as a companion. She took it, her touch firm and sure. Together they walked from the garden back towards the lodge. The pack they passed did not bow, but they nodded, their eyes holding a deep, abiding respect. The weight of crowns and curses was lifted. What remained was the work of dawn, clear, cold, and full of possibility. On the steps, Elias paused and looked out over his territory, not with the possessive gaze of a king, but with the watchful eye of a guardian. Maya stood beside him, her past no longer a chain, her future no longer a question. In the distance, a lone wolf howled, a clean, rising note against the vast, silent sky. It was not a howl of dominion, but of existence, of presence. It was the new dawn's howl, and somewhere deep in the quiet space within him, Elias felt an echo. Not the old bond, but something new, fragile and wholly his own, a peaceful, answering silence that was at last enough. The end.